Today I'm joined by Josiah Lippincott. He is a former Marine officer. He is a current student, if I'm not mistaken, at the Andel School of Statesmanship at Hillsdale College, and also a 2020 alumnus of the Claremont Institute's Publius Fellowship. And it seems, or Publius. Is it Publius?
It's Publius, yeah.
Okay, Publius Fellowship. I'm very, very happy to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. I enjoy the opportunity to talk about my work.
Yeah, it's exciting because your work currently includes, I'm not going to call it shit posting. I'm going to call it a very targeted, aggressive, classy, distinguished attacks at the military establishment and all of their, minor bureaucrats and cronies and everyone who's in that org chart. And you've done a fine job of it. And that's essentially how I found out about you, because it's very enjoyable to see you. You have sometimes kind of a bit of a scary energy, and I think that's great. I'm happy I'm on your side. I would not want to I wouldn't want to be in the TikTok posting sergeant. No way. So very, very happy to have you on. I mean, you've thought about this thing. You've been in the Marine Corps. You are retired now. You're not part of, in any way, affiliated with the Army, and I understand why you aren't. But how did we get to this point? I mean, what went wrong, and when did it go wrong? And I mean, a lot of people have seen the current state of the military. If you haven't, please do check out Josiah's Twitter feed. You will see what it looks like. What was the first domino in your view?
Yeah, so I think for me at least, I can talk about this. I think one of the things I haven't covered on Twitter or in my public writings is my own experience and kind of how I ended up here. So this is probably a helpful place to do that. I was a Marine Corps officer. I served for 4 years. I never saw combat. I've never claimed that I saw combat, but I did deploy. And I deployed to Okinawa in particular. My role was I was a rocket launcher liaison officer. So I was working with, unusual for a junior officer, I worked with a lot of outside higher command units, headquarters, spent a lot of time rubbing shoulders with planners, talking about how to employ this long-range system. And basically, while I was there, it became painfully clear to me that the United States was in no position to wage a conventional war against anyone, much less the People's Republic of China. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I can go into the history if you want, but it comes down to something very simple. Nuclear war makes conventional conflict between nuclear armed states basically impossible. No rational state wants to fight a conflict that will end with itself being annihilated in a nuclear fire. That's not a strategy. It's not a winning strategy. And to my knowledge, no one has ever solved that problem. On the other hand, you have insurgency, which you are trying to occupy a country where people don't want you to be, and they're willing to fight you with small arms munitions for years at a time. And what we've seen is the American military is not competent to win either kind of conflict. And this has caused all kinds of spiritual problems. And more importantly, the military has been hijacked by the ideological left. And there's no way around it, but there are deep and abiding problems with the military establishment, and it has to be called out.
Yeah, and that's your day job now, it seems, and it's
close to it.
Yeah, I mean, the last war that was won was the Second World War, at least by the U.S. military. Was there anything that I've missed since then? Is there any new stuff on the horizon?
No, and I would argue, and if you want me to be controversial, here I'll go. Yeah, World War II was a kind of victory. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were defeated as regimes, but the Soviet Union took over half of Europe, and then the communists took over Asia. The Soviet Union occupied Korea, and just maybe less than 10 years later, we were there fighting another war against these communists. So I would argue that World War II, in many ways, is not what people think it is. It did not. It's much more complicated than people think. The Soviet Union had agents all throughout the American government. And they had policies and interests that were not aligned with those of everyday Americans. So a lot of the boomers, especially, look at Iwo Jima or Normandy, and they think that's so badass. Like America just was taking names and defeating these powers. And in reality, you've got the communists, the Soviet government had access. For instance, Scott McMeekin in his book Stalin's War, the Soviets had control of Newark Airport. They were receiving hundreds of billions of dollars in aid. They were receiving technical information about nuclear weapons, some of which I think was provided by the American government willingly. So, there's a lot of problems there that people just don't want to touch. And since World War II, it's been really calamity after calamity, but none of them have been existential conflicts. So, fighting to a draw in Korea, I would say losing in Vietnam, even the first Gulf War, there are lots of problems here, and they're not really wins. And in fact, I think they've done a lot of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that what was the cause of the U.S. essentially fighting the Soviet Union's war for? Was it infiltration, or was it just the fact that the Soviet Union had a confident, powerful, energetic empire that it wanted to build, while the U.S. was mature in terms of ideologically mature and wasn't really in that phase of aggressive exuberance?
I would say a lot of it was naivete on the behalf of the American people. And a lot of it was the fact, as the Venona decrypts make very clear, there were Soviet agents all throughout the government. Probably the most prominent example was Harry Hopkins, who was FDR's aide, basically his right-hand man. And I think either he or Harry Dexter White, who was also a Soviet fellow traveler, selected would have been vice president. Hopkins had serious medical problems. But what you see throughout there is that, and McMeekin does a great job of portraying this, the Soviet line was being promulgated by American officials within the government. And, everyday Americans were not tracking on this. They were told, and then outright lying and propaganda. For instance, look at Walter Duranty at the New York Times, feeding Stalinist propaganda about the massacre in Ukraine, the Holodomor, and just accepted as gospel. I mean, it's hard for Americans to understand, but this deep state, the lying media, that wasn't invented in the Obama administration, right? Like, this is a problem that's been around for a while. And, you just have to go to the entire world order is built on the Nuremberg war crimes trials and the Allied victory in World War II. But you've got the communists present the whole time. Like, that's a huge problem. Like, they were in this, just to rant, if you will, in the summer of 1941, Stalin had invaded as many countries as Adolf Hitler. And he had murdered millions of people. There's no disagreement about that. Before Auschwitz had even been fired up as a death camp, you had the purges, you had mass starvation. Stalin was not a good man. And yet you have FDR, just drooling over this guy at Yalta and other places. And then, American propaganda made for the Soviet Union, the Why We Fight series, it has a series on the battle for Russia, and it's just straight up Soviet propaganda. And, you just have to come to terms with what was going on there. And, I think maybe now, finally, 80 years later, we could start asking the right questions. And I think that's really where you have to go to really grasp the core problem here.
Yeah, it does seem like we're living in the shadow of the Second World War. We're living in kind of the almost like, essentially, we've made a religion out of that conflict. We've projected all of our demons onto the Nazis versus the Jews or the oppressed, and it's kind of, we're just replaying that drama, like a psychodrama up until this exact point. And I think, if you read James Burnham, like Suicide of the West, or, there's a newer book by Richard Gutko, The Demon in Democracy, it does seem like there's a bit of a convergence between, liberalism proper and essentially they're not that far apart in terms of their goals, in the sense that, there is a progressive future. Every year is better. We're improving technologically. Maybe the Soviets put more of an accent on, the private property not being that important. But if you part with 50% of your tax income, or if you part with 50% of your income in the form of taxes, and I don't necessarily know if the communists are much more kleptocratic of private income than the liberals. So I don't know what's your perspective on the fact that they're pretty, they're pretty convergent, these two ideas.
Well, I mean, I think COVID has made this so obviously clear to anyone who's paying attention. You simply have whole countries turned into prison camps. The work of Giorgio Agamben is very relevant here. The liberal solution to every single problem is mass surveillance and prisons. You have to keep people under tight control. You license every single thing that they do. You have to build data banks and surveillance centers and data centers and Patriot Act. All of those things are that's the liberal solution, right? Climate change. You need to stop eating meat. We need to have a smart thermostat that's going to watch how much energy you use. You need to hook up everything to a computer that's going to be eventually transmitted back to some sort of external entity. You are not allowed to be free and independent. You need to submit to biomedical surveillance in order to cross the border, get on a plane, have a job. We need to know, are you a plague carrier or not? And so, yeah, I would say liberalism and communism are obviously different phenomena in some ways, but there's a lot of overlap. And the instinct, if you talking about ideas can cause people to lose their minds. Look at the kinds of people who gravitate to liberalism and communism. You find a ton of overlap. And these ideologies are concerned with similar aims. Man as a stomach. You are a consumer. You are a material being. You got to remember, Marx was a turbo-capitalist. He believed that the pinnacle of capitalism was communism. The libertarians stop at the peak capitalism stage. But and both the libertarian faction, the liberal faction, oh man, it's if only you're going to have the withering away of the state. You're going to have the withering away of that older regime. They're very clear about this, and it's like they're saying the same thing. Now they're different, but come on, it's the overlap, especially in our time, is disturbing. They're totalitarian ideologies. These are not. It's not the American founding principles. That much is very clear, and I think worth analyzing.
Yeah, I mean, you keep even like in the context of Claremont, people are talking about new founding, refounding. Can there be a refounding without the initial circumstances? Like in the sense that it was just a different type of nation, and you had different, you had a kind of an ideological substructure that you could build liberalism within, which was religion, or which was even kind of ethnic homogeneity. You kind of had Anglo-Saxon mores and norms. So I don't know how do you do a new founding on the substrate that you have right now?
Well, that's the difference between politics and political philosophy. I read John Locke, the second and first treatise, and I say, look, I agree with basically everything he's saying there is right. You got to have government by consent. You need to have protection of rights. You need to have the protection of morality. Locke is very critical of the sins that cross the main intention of nature. He refers to sodomy, incest, and adultery. Deeply moralistic. The problem there is that, the form is less important than the matter out of which the regime is made, right? You can have the best constitution in the world. If no one has the spiritedness or the inclination to defend it, it's a Republican speech only. You can talk about it all day long. It's not real. But I think people have to, I would say, and I'm concerned by this, but I think it's a real problem, is that, one of the things, and I've been reading the second treatise, that's why it's coming to mind. Locke makes clear that if, the protection of rights is more important even than a government by consent. And he says in the beginning of regimes, it's pretty natural to end up with a dictator, in a sense of, that's the kind of government that will protect you. But it's not it's not a Republican form of government. And I think the American right and the left, not these people don't get it. If you don't protect people's rights, if you don't make them safe, what's going to end up happening is they're going to turn to someone who will. And so the Republican Party can grift all day long. The Democrats can encourage crime and promote the weirdest, most bizarre ideological fetishes. You have to remember, if things get bad enough, people are going to start looking for solutions. So, the whole point is if you have to appeal to heaven, if you are saying this regime is so degenerate, we can't fix it from within, you no longer really have law in the ordinary sense. You're back to nature. And if I were advising anyone, if anyone were to listen to me, and I consider myself a political moderate in this way, I'm a moderate centrist. You need to protect people's rights, and you need to get back to having real law. Stop having government by edict. But is Joe Biden capable of that? I don't know. And just to one last point, and I agree. I love the Claremont Institute. I'm good friends with Ryan Williams, with Peterson. Again, my teachers are all defenders of the founding. What I would argue, though, is you have to remember they're arguing for a revolutionary politics and a spiritedness that makes that possible. So any discussion of ideas has to remember there is this core that's pretty radical, and you have to come to grips with what that means. Is what do you prefer? Do you prefer slavery or war? Which do you prefer? Because that choice may one day become unavoidable. And are you going to fight for your freedom or not? That becomes a real question. It's not a happy question, but it's a question nonetheless.
We're definitely slowly sliding into one form of kind of soft slavery, because whatever you would call the last 2 years, democratic isn't one of the labels that I apply to them. And it is, whatever, gentle totalitarianism, soft velvet totalitarianism, but the totalitarianism is there. We've been, constrained to live in our houses, to wear a very specific religious garb, to it's just a complete overreach and complete overreaction. I mean, I understand in the beginning we didn't know exactly what COVID was, but we've found out it's a disease. It's probably endemic by now. It's not something we'll have to live with. Probably originated in suspicious circumstances, and all sorts of information that we now have, and we didn't back then. So but to round this off, I wonder what you think about, because you were talking about essentially the clay, what is the republic made of? Who are the people that compose our the West in general? Because I mean, I'm in Romania. I'm one of the satellite states of the great empire, so I'm not necessarily in the middle of it. But I've lived in the UK, and I feel the UK is is living the psychodrama as well. So the people are, I think, a very similar clay to what you have in America. So I mean, just looking around, I do not think 99% of people that I know would not be capable of engaging in any sort of combat, I mean, what for? Like, the question just doesn't even occur. Like, what purpose, who with? It's just so completely outside of it. So I don't even know what type of regime you can build with people who are just so rudderless, or I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I would say, part of it is the people of themselves. The mob does not philosophize, is one way of putting this. People will be like, well, people are going to wake up. No, that's not really how that works. People have instincts, and I don't want to dog this at all. The instincts are very powerful, and very, very few people are really capable of thought in any sort of meaningful sense. It's a small number, but the deeper point there is, like, how do you make a regime out of the people who are here today? I think some of it is the people will surprise you. I can only speak in the American context. I think, well, I can speak about maybe the Japanese and Chinese context. I spent time in Asia, but for the Americans, I would say there's quite a significant percentage that are quite jealous of their rights and have a spirited willingness to defend them. they are at the fringe, right? They're not in power. They're not the kind of people you see on television. My neighbors are not this white working class city in the rural Michigan is not, no one cares about these people. They don't even know what they're like. And so, but there's quite a core of virtue there that has not been extinguished. So could you shape something out of that? I absolutely believe you can. I think Trump showed how that was possible. Trump just really wasn't willing to go full on. He just was always reticent to do that. He was surrounded by bad advisors, and there's all kinds of reasons why that may be. But Trump really, I think, is the model for how do you take the health and life-giving instincts of the people and give them shape and a purpose, and that's the role of people who are interested in public service or public life. Like, how do you just make this real? How do you, how do you communicate these ideas? I think that's important. And it's, don't lose your mind either. The people are often much better instincts than anyone who claims to govern or lead them. But there is a need for leadership, right? You need the Trumps. You need someone like that who can combine wisdom and power. That's really what you need if you're going to lead the people well and to give them the kind of regime, that's the founder's role, right? And this is a very thorny problem in political life. I mean, authors like Machiavelli, Locke, they're all very deeply concerned with foundings and how to sustain a regime. So I mean, maybe I don't know if that addresses the question, but I think it gets to the kind of problems.
Yeah. Do you believe that there's also kind of a deeper structural problem here? Because I feel like this type of leadership is almost not possible with just the nature of institutions at the moment, because we're allegedly led by experts. So the experts are they're doing politics without doing politics. They're just they bring the common sense. They come in and do science, political science, social science, all sorts of science that they execute on rather than there being there's not really need for leadership in an expert-led organization. It's all about the facts that you bring to the table. So I feel like this paradigm that we're operating under essentially sucks out the capacity for leadership. It just the structure of it just becomes a managerial operation. Everything's just run by managers and on the basis of the newest science or whatever science they have at the moment. So do you think this is something that can be overcome, or does this resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, these people claim to have the mantle of science and the mantle of expertise, but they're crazy and they're evil. That's what the process is, the punishment. And the bureaucrat serves the process. The total state, Nietzsche, great. There's this great passage in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It's the new idol. And he says there that the state is the death of peoples. It's the coldest of all cold monsters. It just devours the real organic life of a regime to make it serve its own twisted purposes, which I think to make it real, that's the bureaucracy. The bureaucrat is the human type that mans the state. They are loyal to nothing except the process. And the process legitimates everything in their minds. The military is like this. You're not loyal to the country. You're not loyal to the flag. You don't care about the civilian populace. Military, and this is something I saw repeatedly. Military leaders were loyal to the Marine Corps. They were loyal to the institution with no sense of something outside of it. And what you ultimately get is opposition to the life of the people. But what does Nietzsche also say is that, you can't, that's not a sustainable thing. And he concludes that passage by saying that those who are at the fringes, they become capable of taking that system down. They are where you find real opposition at the edge of the empire. And then they face inward. You can't, Horace, the Latin poet Horace says, you can drive nature out with a pitchfork, but she always returns. And our regime is desperately trying to drive out nature. Women are just like men. You can cut off your genitals and be a different gender. You can print as much money as you want and there are no consequences, blah, 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 blah. Down the line you go. Nature will return. And the science and expertise practiced by our ruling class it has no connection to reality. It is, they have, someone like Anthony Fauci took the medical establishment, the real medical science, eviscerated it, pulled off its skin, and then wears it as a cloak. That's how these people operate. And so, yeah, institutions are very powerful, but they're not invincible. And we are in a time of profound decline. The reason someone like myself has become as popular or has grown as much as I have in a very short amount of time is because this regime is in total collapse. They couldn't be goat herders in Afghanistan. All the war college degrees in the world didn't do jack squat against these goat herders from the Pashtun warriors out of the Hindu Kush. They didn't know what to do with them. We outspent the Taliban 100,000 to 1, and they took their country back using small arms. It's like, this regime is not powerful, and those institutions are not powerful either.
Yeah, was this a reason why you decided to speak out? The fact that you felt that, okay, because you're a so-called facelord. You have your name, your face out there. You're taking people on very directly without any sort of dissimulation. So did you feel something in the air and saying, okay, it's time to talk about this stuff because I'm the person to do it?
Yeah, no, I had a friend of mine, a teacher. He once asked me, so we were talking about the military. This was in the spring before I really kind of became active on social media. And he was saying, we're talking about the military. I was talking about reformers. He said, well, who's the highest ranking reformer in the DOD? Like, who could President Trump pick and have them be the person to reform the military? Like, is it a colonel? Is it a general? Who is it? And I told him, I said, you are looking at the highest ranking reformer in the military. It's literally, and that's not to toot my own horn. It's to say there is literally almost no one else. No one. I mean, I was a lieutenant. I got promoted to captain. I was a junior company grade officer. And as I looked at this, I was like, no one is saying what needs to be said. And a lot of his civilians don't understand the military. They're deferential to it. And I said, oh no, I've spent 4 years here. I saw some wild stuff. And I was like, just incompetence is insanity. I was just like, I can't believe what I'm looking at right now. But then everyone around me was like, well, this is just fine. This is how we do things. It's like, no, it's not how we should do things. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, I saw the opportunity in the fact that I was like, I don't know anyone else who's going to say these things. And the way I became, social media famous is I just asked a question to a general. But it's like people have a certain spiritual constitution. And I kept poking at these senior leaders on social media. And then I got the exact response that it's not even an ideological or a reasoned account. It's that spiritual inclination. He saw in me everything he hates. How dare you? You can just see him. Oh, we got to stop this kid. And then, boom, you lit the match. General Donahoe, these people sow the seeds of their own destruction. And sometimes these things are mysterious. I mean, not to be all mystical or whatever, but I was reading Xenophon's Anabasis. Xenophon was a student of Plato, a student of Socrates. And he led the Scythian expedition of the Greeks against the Persians. Anyway, to summarize, at one point, the Greeks are totally outnumbered by the Persian armies. They're surrounded by enemies. And in the night, Xenophon, who scholars say he's in his late 20s in the book, young man, has no leadership ability in the army. He's just basically a gentleman soldier. The army's leadership has been destroyed. The army itself is in chaos. They're surrounded by enemies, and Xenophon goes to sleep. And in the dream, he sees the fire, Zeus, the fire from heaven, descends on the house of his father and ignites it. And Xenophon wakes up and then he exhorts himself. He says, if I do nothing, we will be destroyed. And then he says, but I can do something in this moment. So Xenophon goes out in front of the Greeks and and these troops, and he gives them this powerful rhetorical speech and says, look, I'm going to lead you now in this moment. And so I would say oftentimes moments are like that. The occasions to do something great or excellent or even make a difference in some small way, I think reflect this kind of, sometimes the divine fire is simply there. and you see the dream or the vision and you say, look, I think something can be made of this. And time will tell. I'm not going to say I'm Xenophon. Xenophon was a much greater, I would say even a philosopher than someone like me, but it's inspiring nonetheless. And I think it shows, Machiavelli is good on this too. Action, action, action. Seize the moment and say what you have to say and think about the problems and then make the claim and then see what happens. And so far, I've gotten a lot of traction on it. And I think it's been helpful for a lot of people who don't understand what the military is like. And I hope to do even more. I hope this my work goes viral, quote unquote, and impacts real policy. That's the aim. And I'm very clear about that. That's what I want to see happen.
I hope so too. I really like this. Essentially, it's a white pill that you're presenting. It's a very hopeful message. And someone else gave me this message on this podcast. Ernst van Zyl. He is it's kind of a dissident figure in South Africa, and as you probably heard, they have some problems down there as well. And he's one of the people trying to very energetically, very patiently, putting himself in quite a significant amount of danger, solve them or find solutions and a place where I'd be like, yeah, man, you probably should leave. But he's like, no, this is my land, and he said that, he is animated by this, like you said, by this fire, by this opportunity to show up and, not be the last man, not be, to present yourself at the gates of history and stake your claim. And I think that's like the whole cycle of, hard times, weak men and all this.
Right.
This is the point where the hard men have to show up.
Yeah.
So why not?
Well, why not indeed? You're right. Like, you never know what's possible until you do it. That goes back to your early question. Well, what are the people capable of? I would say ultimately, try it and find out. That's how you discover. See what you can do. I mean, I hate people who are just depressed about everything. It's like, you're spiritually not in the right mindset. You have to understand what the possible is. Politics is the art of the possible in many ways. And so you figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I started this podcast in January of this year, and it went really well. I've had some spicy guests on, and I'm waiting for the hammer to drop eventually or something like that. But actually, nothing's really happened. No one's really attacked me. I feel like there's much more space out there. Obviously, some people will say that's because I'm a Fed, but nothing's I haven't really been eviscerated by the regime, because I think it's also, like you say, I think it's time. I think it's time. If people have stuff to say, if people want to show up and they want to platform other people, they want to have interesting conversations, this is the time to do it. And that's what I felt as well. Like at the end of last year, I'm also not very like a seasoned Twitter user, anyone that's been on social media for a long time, but I just saw, people were saying interesting stuff, and it's things that were talked about for a long time, for like tens, decades, in forums and all that type of stuff. But it was slowly seeping into the mainstream. So there's definitely something happening, and it's like you said, the battle with nature is temporary. It can't be permanent.
No, it's not permanent, but the problem is you can get long periods of insanity, and so if you're going to avoid that, you just have to make an effort, right? Like, the Soviet Union withstood the forces of nature for 70 plus years. And I think there's a very compelling argument that eventually just the devastating losses they took in World War II were just too much to eventually overcome. They couldn't sustain, I forget what percentage of their male population was killed. I think between the ages of 18 and 35, it's something like 20%. But don't quote me on that. But it's something like that. It's so ridiculous. Like, how do you recover from that as a regime? So yeah, I don't want to. I'd like in my lifetime, I'd like to see things get dramatically better, and I think there's a real possibility for that. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and you've had a recent piece in American Greatness about the future of the army, or what you would like the future to be as a reformer, as the most popular reformer in the army.
Yeah, right. I would say the argument that I make there is that the American people, if you're on the right and you want to make a difference, I would say we need to get the approval rating for the military below 40%. That's the number I've chosen, well below 50%. Because if it's close, then if it's used, it's going to be tight. But if it's below 40%, I just don't think the Biden regime is going to want to use the military to crush internal dissidents, right? It just makes it hard to use. It makes it so you can't just lie to people. You have to use force as opposed to fraud. So I would say I'm going to keep the drumbeat up until Pew Research does the poll and they say, approval for the military is below 40%. Then we can start having real conversations about the military. And I'd say what I really want to do is create a recruiting crisis. Make this painful. If I had any message for young people and for young white men in particular, do not join the military. There is nothing there for you. Nothing. There is the weapons training, the skills. I've heard this argument. If you want weapons training and skills, go buy a gun, go out to a local range and practice. And if you do it, if you shoot once a month, you will shoot so much more often than your average soldier or Marine. It's not even funny. In my time in the Marine Corps in the fleet, I think we did 2 ranges as a battery, and and never with the whole number of personnel, maybe 3. We didn't have the allocation for ammunition. We just didn't have it, right? A lot of our gear was simply broken. It just wasn't combat effective. So, people are like, well, I'm going to get the military skills and discipline. It's like, this regime, I just don't think the value is there. And I've changed on this position. I would have said the same thing a couple of years ago. Well, I take the good with the bad. At this point, no, you need to find something else. And you can encourage spiritedness, patriotism, service to your community. You don't need to do it through the military. And I'm telling you, recruiting crisis will get people's notice. That'll be like, oh, snap. I mean, just look at all those Marines killed in Kabul. It's like, that's killed by idiocy. No proper security procedures. You're helping rescue all these Afghans the people who weren't willing to fight for their own country, they get to come live in ours. How is that fair? How is it fair that people who won't fight and die for their own regime want Americans to come fight and die so that they can come live here? So that you want to go die for that? You want to go be draped in the flag for that? Really? I think if you're a young man today, you totally. I would say the one thing you can deny the regime is access to your body and to your mind.
Do any of the generals in the present U.S. Army do they even believe that a war can be won? Do they even want wars to be won?
I would say a lot of them don't think about war, so probably not. That's like Major General Joe Clyburn talking about her nail polish on Twitter. I saw a general today. He was talking about playing video games. It's like, this is not serious. These people are not serious. I think they just don't think about the problems. I think that I'll give another example. I was at a war game. We were essentially playing out the war with China in the Pacific. And at the end of the war game, someone was like, well, at this point, the Chinese would use nuclear weapons to defend themselves. And it was like, okay, war game over. I was like, wait a second. How are you supposed to win that? Let's talk about that problem. No one was interested. Why? Because it puts you out of business if you're in the military industrial complex. Or could. And I would say, why do I say I'm the highest ranking military reformer? Is that just hubris? What I'm saying is I want to reform the military, as in I want to slash the DoD budget. I want to see the Army turned back into the early Republican military that we have. When Congress declares war, then you go out among the people and you build an army out of citizens. This professional military that we have, it's not very professional, as you see from their social media engagement. And B, they don't know anything about winning wars. They don't know anything about it. At most, the special operations guys, I think, are competent at firefighting. I think in terms of, like, in a firefight, they can shoot at the enemy and win sometimes, though not always. As we saw, like Operation Red Wings, when they shot down that helicopter, the Taliban shot down the helicopter, killed the Navy SEALs, the Marcus Luttrell story. They're not super soldiers. They're trained, but they're not. They're not so overpowering that they can't be defeated by a competent enemy who's just a small group of non-trained soldiers. So yeah, I would say to answer your question, no one's considering winning. They're not even considering fighting. they know. I think a lot of people know deep down there's no way. Or it's the conflicts just look different, and our military is not competent to address them. That's the real problem.
So what is the purpose of the US Armed Forces now in their own perspective?
It's a jobs program.
Okay.
It's like you're giving jobs to lower middle class whites, women, minorities. Um, it's a grift. It's a huge section of the pie that gets spent on military contractors. It's like the money we give Israel that gets turned around and spent at Raytheon's door. It's not nothing to do with Israeli security or something. You're milking the teat. I think, yeah, that's what the Pentagon exists to do. It's a jobs program for like D3 athletes at American colleges who don't want to sit behind a desk. And, that type, and then liberal, and increasingly a large number of liberal status drivers who like the idea of like putting on the uniform and like having, I'm in the Pentagon. They like that kind of stuff. Harvard grads, that kind of thing. They like that.
Yeah. It does seem like the ultimate girl boss, office to get to. I mean, I have a friend who was in the UK military, and he was complaining about women in the military, and it wasn't a new thing. They've been in the military, but they were kind of expanding the reach of putting women in special forces, and he was describing to me just not only the toll it took on morale, just having mixed groups. I mean, what he was saying was that everyone was having intercourse at all times, and it was quite a debauched situation. But the women were even with all the help that the men had to offer them, and because they were, I don't know, a team that had to. There's a lot of physical challenge, and apparently the women were getting stress fractures in their legs, in their femurs, in their hips. Like, it's not a thing that you can't even imagine how terrible that should be. And apparently that was with help, with people carrying their equipment. So, what for? Why?
Well, there's a good book by Martin Van Creveld, who's an Israeli military historian, who I find in particular really valuable. He wrote a book called I think it's Men, Women, and War, talking about women in the military. And he makes a great point there. He says, once the military, and Van Creveld is the one who really got me aware of the problem of state-on-state warfare. It was like, how do you fight a nuclear armed state? Oh, it turns out this is a huge problem. He says, once war becomes unserious and you don't fight them in the way that you're supposed to, i.e. against a conventional opponent, the need for military virtue declines. So then you can have people who are overweight. You can have, I like this, the breastfeeding moms, new moms. Like, are you really, I mean, I get this is so misogynistic, incel, virgin, blah, blah, blah. How are you supposed to give a gun to a new mother and tell her to charge a hill? And the point is like, well, we would never do that. They're going to do things here, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. It just means you're no longer thinking about winning, thinking about killing the enemy or defeating him. It's about technical stuff. It's about administration. It's about making people's feelings, feel good. It's not about winning wars. That goes out the window. And you've seen that. So, for a lot of feminists, the idea of joining the military is this, like, I'm going to really prove something to the man. And like you're pointing out, what you end up doing is you turn barracks into whorehouses. It's just horrible. It's indecent. The indecency that I saw between men and women in the military was shocking. It's just, and not as even just, you're such a prude. I'm saying adultery, just gangbangs, just unprofessional relationships, alcohol, drug abuse, domestic violence, rape accusations. I mean, I was talking to an NCIS investigator on Okinawa. He said 80 to 90% of the cases he investigated was trying to litigate Marines or soldiers or airmen who were at public events intoxicated and then sexual touching and deciding whether or not it met the standards of sexual assault. It's like, you just can't have a functional military when you have what's basically adult high school playing out everywhere you go. And this isn't to say there are no patriotic women. I've met the kind of really like freakishly strong women who are able to do all these military things, but you're not building a military off of these like the fringes, like the most extreme examples. You're thinking about how do you have a military in general? And no one thinks about this stuff. So now it's all about, we got to have a lactation room in our military headquarters. And I'm not joking about that. Like, that's something that someone like Lieutenant Colonel Scott Stevens, a big Mill Twitter account, he loves that. We got to make sure. I was engaging with a woman, staff sausage. She's like, I was breast pumping in the field. It's like, I'm all for mothers. I love women. I want women to have their rights protected. I love smart spirited women. And one in particular who there's, like my fiance, great gal, but none of that is to say just to lie to ourselves about what the difference is by nature, right? That's ridiculous. And it leads you to this place of just insanity.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, and I feel it kind of bites you back in a way, because this is all kind of under the aegis of the project of liberalism to free people more, give them more degrees of freedom, let women in the military. But what you have on the other end is stress fractures and the weird the strange compulsion to prove something by pumping breast milk in the army barracks, or just it's just insanity. I mean, I have a degree in gender studies. I understand. I know the mind of the enemy. I understand what goes on in there. But it's just crazy to me. Now I'm one of these women. I could probably go to the lactation room. I'd qualify for that now because I have a small baby. But it just does not make any sense to me. If you take away that compulsion to prove something, there's no way. I'm sorry. There's no way a normal, well-adjusted woman would like to visit the lactation room at the Platoon X or wherever.
No, I think, that's right. So I think what you're saying, normal and well-adjusted. Yeah, the family is in collapse in America. Divorce, single motherhood, divorce, family law, vile. You can, this is American law, Fifth Amendment protection. You have to get a warrant to typically take someone's stuff. Very rare exceptions, like if you use a gun in a commission of a crime, they can take that as evidence. I'm not exactly sure about the law, but mostly you can't have stuff taken from you without a jury of your peers. You need a court decision, like it's a process. You have due process of law. Not so in the family courts. Children can be seized from a parent, generally the father, with nothing more than a restraining order. And so what you see is the collapse of the family, and then you have a lot of people who are not well adjusted. They don't have normal instincts. They don't have normal sexual instincts. They're just, I'm amazed. I would say earlier, you're talking about liberalism meaning freedom. So now in our time, allegedly more free, you're going to have all this sex, anything goes. And it turns out a lot of millennials are not having sex at all. Or it's really bizarre setups, polyamory, but multiple men with one woman, it's OnlyFans. I would say liberalism, far from being an ideology of freedom, is an ideology of slavery. You are free only to pursue your vices. That's it. And if you want to do anything decent or noble, no. That gets crushed. Like, you want to, own a gun, defend yourself, train. Oh, that's going to be a real problem. We're going to hassle you for that. So yeah, I would say a lot of it is the social breakdown. And so you have a lot of lost young men and lost young women looking for order, looking for discipline, looking for community. And they find it in places like the military. But it's a problem. You just then have all these social problems that that occupy most of your time. I would say when I was a platoon commander, that was the dominant, just dealing with the issues, what these people were having in their lives, often very tragic. And I don't mean to make light of this at all. It was horrible, horrible stuff. But I think that goes to your point. It's like, this is what you get when you have this unhinged family and personal life. People are very unhappy, deeply, deeply unhappy.
Yeah, and they're looking for something, and they imagine that the military might be their solution.
Yeah.
But once they get there, it's all about lactation rooms and gangbangs. Well, welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome. Welcome.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think my friend Mary Harrington had an interesting article recently where she described kind of a divide between kind of two factions in U.S. conservatism. You have kind of the boomer cons, conservatism Inc., and then you have
Yeah.
conservatism Inc. in the sense that like the tattooed new generation that's much more energetic and much
Yeah.
more kind of a bit more populist, a bit more aligned with not they're not fusionists. They're not upset about using the state to uphold a certain morality or certain values. A predetermined script, not something that's constantly evolving and
Yeah.
constantly ever freer, ever better. So I wonder what you think about that. So you've been around, Claremont. You've been kind of in these circles recently. Do you feel that there's a kind of a changing of the guard, or is there a open conflict between these two? Because essentially, the old conservatives are liberals, and these new ones
Yeah.
are post-liberal. They're not liberals.
Yeah. I would say you're seeing a bit of both. I think you're seeing open conflict. I think in the Trump administration, you very much saw that. The neocon faction ended up by the end, with a few exceptions, excuse me, by the end, they basically occupied the White House. Guys like H.R. McMaster, who I ratioed on Twitter, by the way, that's a point of honor for me myself. He deserved it. Guys like that, that's a neocon. He kept Trump in Afghanistan. Now, talked to people who were in the room. That was the guy pushing Trump to not end the war. And Trump listened to him, and it's not ideal, but I would say Trump represented a new kind of this boomer who went off the rails in comparison to everyone else. Now this guy's out there talking about immigration, trade, war. These issues that Americans since Pat Buchanan, you don't get a voice in that. More immigration, more war, less, and more quote unquote free trade. And Trump really fought back on that. So you're talking about this new wave of young conservatives, some of which I think there's promise. A lot of it is cringe. And this isn't to dog on people specifically. I'm not subtweeting anyone, but it's really hard to be a critic of the regime when you're in Washington, D.C. And I don't expect reform to come from D.C. Like, that's not. It's great that there are people who are saying interesting new things. I think it's awesome, but I'm not going to say, everything will be better when the post-liberal right takes over. I think there are problems there too. Oftentimes we get really confused as to what the aim is. Like the libertarians, that faction, part of it very based, criticizing the Federal Reserve, American foreign policy, awesome. The weed and gay marriage, cringe. The defense of private institutions who can do whatever they want, like, tyranny is fine if it's Twitter doing it and not the White House. That's crazy. But saying, we're going to take over the administrative state and use it against the left, that's insanity. And I think also people sometimes lose their mind over some of the religious warfare stuff. Like, to use one example, but this is an ecumenical critique. Well, if we just had a Catholic government, that would solve all our problems. No, it really wouldn't. It's like, no, that's that Catholic dogma about the Eucharist or about baptism. There's plenty of arguments for why that may be true, but as a political project, Catholic monarchy is not going to solve our problems, right? Like, that's not, most Americans, for one, would find that to be just totally ridiculous because they're not Catholics who believe in monarchy. To use, I think, one example, but you see a lot of this, like, if only we had a religious revival, that would solve all our problems. And I'm super edgy because I'm more trad or something. And oftentimes it's really not going to go anywhere. It's just, it's dead on arrival, if you will. And I think betrays the kind of a lack of real leadership and thoughtfulness from those on the right capable of giving it. So, but that's a deeper problem that, I think I'm trying to help as much as I can. But I'm just one guy.
I completely agree with you. I think that's you've kind of hit the nail on the head with the critique of post-liberalism. The difference between liberals and post-liberalism is that post-liberalism, whatever direction it comes from, it has to stake a claim in terms of values. So it has to make explicit, positive statements about what type of regime it wants to see. And then you have Catholic integralism as being the more recognizable of the regimes, just because people know what Catholicism is, and kind of, at least, you crack open a book and see in general what the outline of it can be. But I personally believe that any regime has a value set. The problem with our regime now is that the values are implicit, and they're not laid out. They're kind of the value of it's tolerance, but as the fundamental value, and then completely run amok, and then also used by the people who, like you said, there's this whole managerial apparatus that uses this value system to extract rents for itself, be it Raytheon, be it, whatever, social services department, or, that kind of can grow like a mushroom on this idea that, there are no limits. We want to create freedom for everyone. And, so even in a regime that's, says that, there are no values. We're essentially open. We're just debating things in marketplace of ideas, blah, blah, blah. There are core values, and people act on them, and they're quite powerful values. They're not, don't tread on me. They're very religiously,
Yes.
tingly values.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think this is kind of the stalemate that a lot of the difference between the liberals, who are kind of scared of what will the values be, because I feel they also know that there needs to be something that is a healthy substrate that can support any sort of society. And it has to be, I mean, it may not be the Ten Commandments, but it needs to be some, like you said, a positive set of rules, that need to be respected, like law. And the law is a law, and it needs to be respected. And like you alluded to before, if the law is not in line with the values, the law is completely disregarded, like it is right now.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. To me, that's the problem. Like you said, a lot of it is cringe. I'm curious to see what comes up next. Maybe there's non-cringe coming up. I hope so.
Yeah. No, I'm excited for that too. And I think this is a moment of great opportunity, in a sense of it's not, I think there are real alternatives out there. And for all of us who are interested in these questions, there's opportunity, right? It's just, social media is very democratic in that way, very populist. Like, I logged on to a Twitter account, I engaged with the military, I keep engaging, I keep writing, people read what I write. I've gotten Twitter mass reported me because I've been criticizing their gods again. So I got suspended by Twitter for like 12 hours for violating the decency, the civility of our regime. So that's a danger, right? You have to be careful not to get banned, but then you have to keep the message incisive and strong. And I think people gravitate to strength. And I think things will surprise the left. I would say, too, I'm not as interested in institutions or organizations. Like, I'm not faulting anyone who thinks that's important. I just want to say the virtues, Machiavelli, in I believe this is book 3, chapter 1 of the Discourses on Livy, he says that a regime is reformed in one of two ways. It is reformed either through the actions of one great man, or it is reformed through the actions of the law or the institutions. But then what does he say about the institutions? They're reformed by a great man. And so what I would argue there is that you have to find a certain kind of character. You're trying to cultivate a certain kind of person. That's much more important, I think, than building the right network or something. You have to form yourself in the right way. So whenever people ask me what they can do to change things, I say, well, look at your own personal life, read good books, make good friends, lift weights, do things that encourage real bodily and mental and spiritual virtue. And I think that will ultimately prove to be more effective than trying to get the right white paper written or something. I don't know if that's the most effective way. Not to say there's no place for it, but cultivate the virtues and wait for the opportunity and then strike. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've had another guest on here who's actually studied this problem. Samo Buria, he's kind of like this guy who studies the life cycle of regimes, and he's also looking at the data, he's also a very strong proponent of kind of a great manifestory theory. I mean, never has, like Machiavelli noted, never has a regime changed without the guiding light, the guiding leadership of someone who was the representative of all the virtues that the regime should have. So,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we don't need philosophers. Maybe we just need Napoleon type American statesmen.
Well, yeah, in the ideal world, you'd get wisdom and power would be united. You'd have someone who's both wise and able to rule. Um, and when I talk about great men, it's like you always have. It's not. There's never. You always need excellence. Now, the problem, of course, is that dictatorship or Caesarism or all these things that people are flirting with now. How do you sustain that in a way that doesn't cause much greater problems? And that's a constant source of problems. So I would say that's where you have to be thoughtful about it. And I think it would be awesome to reform the country without needing to blow everything up. That would be awesome, but you have to find people willing to do the reforming. And where are you going to find those people? I'm trying it in my small way, but
Yeah. Do you
you need
think
them.
there is a possibility to continue this politics without politics, or will politics have to come in, somewhere? Because at the moment we essentially have a front, and you have all this all essentially the bureaucrats are running the show, the managers are running the show. Theoretically, if you actually drill down into what the regime believes about itself, is that you don't really need democracy if you have facts on your side. Things can be run
Hmm.
scientifically. So, in a way, you kind of have to dismantle at least this paradigm before you can bring in leadership, because this machine runs itself. Why would you need leaders when you have science or knowledge?
Yeah,
Yeah, the decree of expertise.
Fauci.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I feel like a bit of revolution has to happen, even if it's within the hollow shell of, of whatever institutions are still there. It might be called the State Department, it might be called the military, but it would have to run very differently for leadership to actually be effective in there.
Yeah. So, I think what I'm arguing for is I want to strip power from the experts and give it to the people, because the experts are treating their credentials from Yale or the Harvard Business School or the JFK Center of Government or whatever. They treat that like a divine right to rule. So I think you're right. You have to strip them of that and be like, no, it might be useful in our time. I think not, but that you have to have consent. In that way, that's my moderation and centrist position, if you will. Is I want there to be fair, free elections where people get to vote for their leaders and people can defend their rights and have leaders that want to do that. But that requires that the people share a sense of justice. And that means you can't just import the entire third world to serve as a battering ram against the population. And that's what the Democratic Party wants to do. I would prefer that we leave the third world alone. Stop trying to rule people without their consent. Stop killing random Arabs over a terrorism threat that could be solved with better immigration controls. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm very much opposed to the kind of pious murderousness of the liberal project. We killed you in the name of gay rights and democracy, so it's fine. No, it's not fine. Stop. And that means stripping power from the experts. And I think that's Trump kicked that off politically in a big way, but he's not done. And he might have a real successor. Not yet, but he could get one. And so if you're a conservative institution, you should be all about trying to find that guy and really trying to see how can we keep the ball rolling? What's the excellence that we need to find and cultivate to get that, more than any white paper or trying to understand theory or something like that. And talk about names and places. People talk about spend too much time with abstractions. It makes it hard to understand reality.
Yeah, I agree. And you're doing your part in the best way. You're kind of that guy for the military, and you continue, taking shots at them. And I'm happy you are, because it does take power away from them. Even people say Twitter isn't real life. Um, millions of people see these interactions, and see the way they're exposed, because if like a lot of this stuff, I didn't realize how cringe these people were until you started engaging with them, and
Yes.
how far gone. And these are like high ranking officers. Like this is not your like lower middle management. No, this is
No.
serious people. So I think you're doing God's work there. So we're coming up on time here a little bit. I want to
Yeah.
ask
Yeah.
you the question of the show. Everyone gets asked this question,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's your recommendation of a subversive thinker that you think people should look into, read more of. Yeah, someone interesting that you discovered.
Man, oh, there's a lot. I think for most people, the subversive thinker that I've found is someone who's, I think, a critic, if you will, outside the mainstream. Right now, that book, Stalin's War by Scott McMeekin, very, very good analysis of the World War II from a perspective that you don't often see. He's looking at it through the Soviet Union's eyes. So he's been very influential on me in a very real, tangible way. I think someone like John Locke that is a very subversive thinker in his way. In our time, it's very subversive. He's very much in favor of Christianity, of resistance to tyranny, of republican government, of decency. That's a defender of manly virtue. And honestly, I mean, I'd say the second treatise in particular is pretty readable. I mean, it's not impossible for someone with a college education, especially, to read and understand. It's not a long treatment either, but it's very, very good. Machiavelli is another one I would say. I'm answering your question probably more. I'm throwing out lots of authors, but Machiavelli in The Prince, he's very hard headed. Just get back to reality. Just the 2x4 of nature beating you upside the head. Machiavelli is so good. You need to figure out the names of the people who rule. Don't talk about abstractions if you can help it. There's a place for that. Talk about who rules, who is in power. Machiavelli relentlessly focused on real historical examples, the actual mechanisms of power, and how that's used both against the people. In Machiavelli, his more subversive take is very populist. These liberals, not populist at all. Machiavelli says in The Prince, the people just want to be left alone. He says you should leave them alone. That's his advice. That is extremely subversive in our time. And Locke is going to say the same thing, but more nicely, I think. But again, those are authors who I think are deeply subversive in our time, and I think worth promoting.
Yeah.
Hard-headedness.
I agree with you, and I feel like this conversation's kind of I feel like it's very, very illuminating, because I agree with you on the idea that a lot of people waste a lot of time, probably myself included, thinking about the very theoretical aspect of of leadership. What should it be? How should we make it? But in the end, it really does boil down to there is natural law, and it is kind of instinctive a lot of times. And if a leader picks up the crown of France with a sword, and shows up, and be it it doesn't have to be the maximum leader of the
Right.
a world emperor or somebody, but someone even at a local level to kind of assumes that role. A lot can be done, but you need to change your frame from being led by history to being that type of person who becomes that. And yeah, it's not easy, but yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah, and I would say people will be like, "Oh, everything's going to hell in a handbasket." To which I respond, "What have you local? I mean, people don't get it in America with the states. There are state politics. Oftentimes, much easier to win elections at that level with it's different. You can do things. You can change things. And the small wins turn into big wins real quick. So I think people who spend too much time detached from reality, they then really struggle with the problems. They get depressed, right? They just don't make real friends. If nothing else, make real friends in real life. Do things where your body is involved. That's what the point about weightlifting or physical movement in the body. It's like you are your body, your mind, your body. They depend on one another. You are not some disembodied soul. And so that applies to politics. Learn the names of the people in power. Don't get lost reading like Marx or something. It's not going to help you as much as just seeing what type of person rules and what do they do and who are their allies. I think that's a much more effective way of going about political life.
Absolutely. And it's also quite the white pill. Because
Yeah.
yeah, this tends sometimes to be a pretty like doomer type podcast where we're talking about decline and collapse and stuff like that. But this is also kind of how you fix this. It's fixable. I mean, I'm just thinking about my ancestors, like just my direct ancestors, like my great grandfather on my dad's side. He was in a work camp. He was like history happened very directly to them, and things were much worse than I can imagine. I know COVID's terrible, and we're stuck in our houses and we have to wear masks and everything, but it is definitely not, even generationally, not the worst thing that's ever happened. So yeah, things can change, and I'm happy that there are people like you out there making it happen, and speaking out very, very well.
No, I think that's exactly right. It's like the mask stuff. You have to wear the mask unless you don't. You just push back, see how much you can get away with. Become ungovernable. There's a great Twitter user at Russian Cosmist, and he's stuck in Canada, oppressed by just the nanny HR state. And that guy keeps spirited resistance at all times. And it's very powerful, very powerful. It's like Michael Anton in his Flight 93 essay quotes Osama bin Laden saying, "Everybody loves the strong horse. Women love strength. Men love strength. People just like it when they see people who are not cowed by petty authority and passive aggressive, bitchy regime. You can fight back against that a lot more easily than you think. So like I said, just keep once you start posting W's, I mean, that can rack up real quick. And that's all it's all about. Like I look at my Twitter account, it's like steady, solid growth. People are paying attention. It's awesome. It's like every day is a white pill. I wake up and I'm like, today I have waged spiritual warfare against this establishment that is all this money and resources. And I'm winning. I keep winning. I keep ratioing 2-3 star generals and their lackeys. I just keep owning. You're getting owned, and they're helping me do it. It's awesome. I will keep going until Twitter bans me, and I'm hoping to make that a long time from now. And I think even when they do ban me, it won't be enough. You have to, if Machiavelli event comes in, if you really want to defeat someone, you have to kill them. And no one I can think of is trying to assassinate me. So, I can keep writing. You can't stop me, not yet. And they can try, and maybe they will. But people get too lost, too depressed, too in their own heads. So I need real friends, and you have to get out of your head sometimes.
Yeah, I completely echo that sentiment. Get out of your heads, people. Follow Josiah on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, is it at J Lippincott?
It is, yeah. _ at the end.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll put that in the show notes, and also read essays at the American Mind, at the American Conservative is the newest.
And American Greatness.
American Greatness. Yeah, exactly. So all the Americans, he's on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Federalist as well, which is interesting, spicy.
yeah, everywhere. Can't stop me.
Perfect. I'm sure you'll have a Substack soon.
Inevitable. It's like, hey, what happens when I get banned? I got to reach out to my dissident right-wing followers or whatever from my email newsletter.
It helps. That's, I'm on there as well. Everyone needs it. Yeah. So thank you so much, Josiah. This was
thank you so much.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good one. I appreciate it.